I have seen it said before that superheroes coming from comic books are like the pantheon of modern America. Pantheon being the general collective of all the gods in ancient Greece in particular, but in any pagan culture really. It's a term for like just the gods as a whole. And I've seen it said that that superheroes are this for modern American culture. So, and I think this is essentially not dumb. This is like, there's like a point to this. Because what the Pantheon are is not like, like Poseidon is the sea. Like the sea is Poseidon. Poseidon is the sea. There you go. That's what the sea is. The Pantheon is, what it really is like the ancient form of general psychology. It's how, like, ancient peoples rationally articulated, like, the doings of people. Like, the gods represented various psychological forces and wills whose, like, complex interwoven interaction with each other formed the kind of foundation of interlocking necessities that drive human action. And also, as well as that, Poseidon is the sea. But the thing that's important about the Pantheon, and like why it makes sense to say that modern superheroes are the Pantheon, is that they represent like this sort of anarchy of intense egos, represents like an array of particular principles which are at play, and the totality of like in general just like a normal individual will is made up of like this like struggle between all these particular principles. Okay, so I've seen that said. That's not my idea here. That's like a kind of precursor to my idea here that I think is like important to understand, and like I've seen that before. Maybe you've seen that before. But what I want to say is that no, superheroes are not straightforwardly the pantheon of like modern America or like modern culture or whatever. No, rather, superheroes are in fact the pandemonium of like of liberalism, of the liberal metaphysical prison of the modern mind. So, real quick, the word pandemonium, it comes from Milton. It was like the capital of hell, like the great stronghold of all the greatest, most terrible demonic forces. And I think it's essentially the best word for the kind of opposite of a pantheon, in a sense, which is like, just a pantheon of explicitly overall evil forces. But that's not quite it, because a pantheon isn't explicitly good. Zeus was a shit. But it's still like the notion of a pantheon is like that it's like necessary, that it's inescapable, like that like the good is a form of like submission to it, because that is the state of things. And a pandemonium is the opposite of this. The pandemonium, like I said, it's like the stronghold in hell. It's actually a monotheistic concept. It's essentially, I mean, what it really is the notion of the pantheon itself transferred into a monotheistic like cosmos. Because in a monotheistic cosmos, what a pantheon means, like a general, like anarchic, struggling collective of various opposed wills or principles, that is an affront to the ultimate unity of the cosmos. So a pantheon is just like, this is what, like this is the variety of wills that exist, and it is inescapable that we are dealing in the context of these wills are at war with one another and exerting themselves in various ways. That's the notion of a pantheon. A pandemonium is kind of like that essential, like, goings on is at play, but it's not speaking to something that's fundamental or necessary in reality. It's illusory, it's false. And that's why it's evil, because it's deceptive, dishonest. It's like not speaking to what is necessary in reality. It's just there's all these wills that are exerting themselves and struggling with one another in this anarchic, mad way. Oh, come on. There you go. But yeah, anyway. He distracted me, but anyway. So I think superheroes are the pandemonium of liberal culture, not the pantheon of modern culture. Because liberal culture is not modern culture. Liberal is no longer modern. Modern means now. Modern means it's fucking happening. Liberal was the modern of like 100, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. Like, I mean, liberalism was fresh in like the American and French revolutions. You know, the notion of establishing a world order according to the universal rights of man and founding general human activity upon this like absolute principle of respecting like individually discerned absolute rights. It's obviously, I mean, I'm going to speak about this a lot because like this is like the essence of like false consciousness today, essentially. Liberalism is no longer modern. Like, liberal ethos is in decay. What's modern is socialism. And, you know, that strikes some people as weird because they're like, oh, fucking Soviet Union is dead. But socialism predates the Soviet Union conceptually and essentially, and it obviously lives on from the Soviet Union. That's like becoming more and more obvious. Like we're leaving the unipolar moment in the dust now a little bit. Anyway, you're way the fuck off the track. So anyway, sorry. So liberalism, the liberal culture, is this this like foundationally voluntarist sort of relation to reality, where the perception of like order itself, the perception of the general emergent like tendencies of the collective of people is this just absolutely like ununified monstrosity of wills. It's the war of all against all, basically. Liberalism is that way. I mean, before the fucking American and French revolutions, of course, is the what do you call it, the English Civil War, Revolution, out of which the Leviathan concept comes, and the war of all against all. I mean, that's in liberalism. That's like at the foundation of liberalism, is this notion of that reality ultimately is merely this war of all against all. And then therefore, on that basis, there's a responsibility, a duty upon the individual to like voluntarily just stand up and impose their particular will against all of that for the greater good. And that is all that is possible for that to be done. That is the only thing that can be done. Because the liberal worldview has no sense of like of essentially the collective concrete of like emergent social solidity, of like of authority that exerts itself over any individual will in a way that is legitimate necessarily. Liberal won't necessarily agree to all this. These are the preconditions of their worldview. But, you know, whatever, they're wrong. You know, I'm just like moving on. I'm not debating. So, superheroes coming from comic books in the American 20th century take the liberal worldview as a given. Liberalism is the precondition of the superhero like ethos generally, and an eternally liberal state of society is kind of an environmental precondition of superhero narratives. It's just in this form of superheroes that like liberalism is like ontologically correct. It's like in the background that like the nature of the stories is such that this is the case. It is this war of wills. There is no like overriding like social concrete structure that is like validly greater than individual wills. There's just this war of wills, and like ethics itself is just equal to having the duty and the discipline to step up as a particular individual and overturn the anarchy. Like, this is what ethics means in superheroes and in liberal culture. It means just having the like the insight, the foresight, and the will to just voluntarily dominate the chaos as a particular perspective. So that's a bit funky. Like, this is just how especially modern Americans think, and like American formed individuals, like the West generally. They think in this like voluntarist manner, and they automatically disregard any sort of conception that is like opposed to or like really beyond this voluntarist manner, that's like just enforcing a submission to a grander collective essence than this kind of thing. So to back up, so this is why it's a pandemonium. It's not a pantheon, because so to back up to the pantheon thing, to treat it as a pantheon, what it would mean for the superheroes to be a pantheon. So superheroes are a pantheon if, like, you know, Batman and Superman are like fucking Zeus or Odin and whoever the fuck. Like, the way you have, I don't know why I said Zeus and Odin. The way you have like Asgard made up of Thor and Loki and blah blah blah. The way you have Mount whatchamacallit of Zeus and Poseidon and blah blah blah. Like I was saying, that sort of totality is the war of wills between the great principles that overdetermine particular, like, normal mere wills. The pantheon, if we take it as necessary, if we take it as, like, correct, then, like, the sort of ancient ethic, the ancient form of wisdom, of submission to this necessity. But wisdom, of course, is submission to necessity. And the ancient form of wisdom is to think through the frame of this is how we know and this is how we can communicate, is that the pantheon is the case. And so, like, wise and good character is a matter of understanding that, like, well, Poseidon's will dictates such and such, and therefore you better watch out for that, and you better anticipate this, and you must never offend Zeus, and therefore you must do this and do this. And it's a legitimate form of wisdom if you, like, use that language, because it's kind of it's like a structural, like a meta-theoretical foundation upon which you can reason well, because these forms speak to these collective apprehensions of something that is real. You okay? There you go. So superheroes are this, if we treat this as correct. Then what that means is to say that, like, you know, like Batman represents the principle of what would it be? Of, like, mastering fear, of mastering inner fear totally, of being... Ooh, what are you up to? What are you doing? James has not yet mastered fear totally. So Batman is all about mastering fear, and by mastering fear, he precisely is, like, in principle, the hero more than any other, who's, like, utterly incorruptible. Like, more than any other hero, if you do read a story about Batman being corrupted, like Batman acting ultimately wrongly, like, that's just a bad story, because it's like that's not Batman. What are you doing? because you know, incidentally, fear is what corrupts, not power. So Batman is all about like utterly dominating your own deepest sense of fear, and therefore being completely invulnerable to the manipulation based on fear of the worst of all different kinds of people. So he's dealing with all these villains that are, like, specifically in their own way extremely capable of imposing fear, and therefore they gain power through manipulation of people and circumstance, and Batman is able to overcome all of this and undercut it and destroy it, because he's impervious to fear. And he's impervious to fear precisely in the way, like, a fucking Shaolin monk is. Like, he's just, like, done the meditative work to reach it. So Batman is about mastering fear. Superman is in principle about just, like, remaining just like innocent in the face of just overwhelming sort of anything. Because, I mean, Superman is like more than any hero, is like just like stupidly overpowered. I mean, Superman like intrinsically has relatively infinite power, like relative to the current situation. He just has like as much power as he has to have in order to defeat it. Like that's like how he is written. He's never gonna be in a situation where he actually like could really, in a serious way, himself lose, and that's not bad. That's just like because the concept of the hero basically is like, just it's about him dealing with other people being at risk and helping them no matter what, and like remaining a beacon. So he's about this kind of like just inspirational, just tenacity and consistent like goodness that like manifests a kind of mature innocence. Superman doing all that shit. Anyway, I don't know. What are the heroes? I mean, I don't fucking read comic books. I don't necessarily know. But anyway, that's probably enough to sort of get across the principle. The principle is that like speaking of superheroes as the pantheon, you can kind of get it because it's like, it's the notion of the pantheon taken from this naturally grounded, like precisely unscientific, but nevertheless sort of like ethos, empirical, like kind of mode of living, like a very like tangible, pragmatic kind of living that was in the ancient pantheon, where it was like you're speaking about all these, like today they seem very abstract things, very like strange supernatural sorts of words, but like they're very visceral. Like to speak of Zeus is to speak of like, I mean, lightning, which you just are aware, like you've witnessed it, and it was the most awe-inspiring natural phenomenon in the entire world. And you're just like, yep, that's the most awe-inspiring part of the world. So speaking with regard to the most awe-inspiring part of the world, like that's, that's pretty visceral. So the pantheon was like that kind of relation to reality. In contrast, transposing it into modernity, the superhero pantheon is like it's psychologized the concept. It's like the principle, instead of being like this part of the world, which is like the sea or whatever, it's like this part of the mind, this part of the soul. And of course, like I said originally, I mean, what's sort of insightful about the ancient pantheon is that although it was sort of constructed out of this part of the world and that part of the world, it spoke to this part of the soul. But the liberal superhero fucking pantheon is just more just sort of openly like on the surface and like kind of therefore a bit superficially, more so it's just it is this part of the soul. Like Batman is just about overcoming fear, and to act like Batman and as inspired by Batman is just like about overcoming fear, which is like individually more tangible or visceral, but it's like only really more tangible or visceral than like acting according to the will of the sea. If you like, you have this sort of bourgeois anarchic state of mind where you're a universal individual who is like in essence like separated from and distilled out of like an environmental groundedness, in which, if the sea is the fucking sea, like when you sail the sea, you're dealing with the sea, and the sea is what the sea is. It doesn't fucking care about what's going on in your head. So that was much more like material to act according to Poseidon's will than according to fucking Batman's, who's just like, well, this wave's coming at me and I need to stand firm against it and be ready to manifest all the tools I have to deal with the chaos that ensues. Instead, it's just like, the wave is fucking coming. You got to know that the wave is gonna do what the wave is gonna do. Okay, but so I started lapsing into critical when I meant to just sort of convey the good faith, like the idea of the superhero pantheon. But anyway, that's like enough of that. So moving on to, it's not a fucking pantheon because liberalism is not ontologically correct and environmentally eternal. It is a pandemonium. So, speaking of superheroes as being the liberal pandemonium, this sort of consolidates and communicates how this like superhero collective fails as if it were to be the modern pantheon, because it is bound by the metaphysical niceties that condition and hold back the liberal worldview, which is that it grounds ethics wholly within this voluntarist conception. It disregards any like reliance upon and like necessary loyalty to any kind of meta individual structure, and it treats essences, be they characters, be they sort of just thematic backgrounds or like environmental conditions. It treats essences as ultimately static. It doesn't. There is essentially, like in the form of the storytelling, there's kind of no possibility of like history. There's no possibility of like social and environmental and structural progression and like changing of conditions that necessarily leads to different essences themselves being at play. Superheroes, like as a form of storytelling, just like cannot fucking do this at all. And it's genuinely therefore like people who like are just primarily like culturally educated by that ethos, that like they think in terms of all these fucking superheroes or whatever the fuck, which is like not uncommon now. They are therefore like aesthetically primed to be incapable of discerning dynamic essence. They cannot think dialectically. They cannot think in terms of this in itself is like undergoing change. It is in a process of becoming. They think in terms of the in itself of whatever given thing just is this, and that's what it is. And like the implication is it always will be that, and it is wise to expect it will remain that. This is just like in the ethos of superhero culture, and this is a product of the liberal worldview. Because this is a product of like the metaphysical conception of the universal individual, like the particular will raised out of environmental condition, and like become a kind of self-grounded like utterly self-creative like will. I mean, this notion, like the liberal notion of freedom, of just like merely lacking any overdeterminate influence on one's decision making. Like, this whole fucking, all this liberal bullshit, this like philosophically liberal, philosophically bullshit. This is just like in the structure of the storytelling of superheroes itself, where, like, you know, if you actually had like Batman, he would put Joker away, and then Joker would like be away or killed. But he wouldn't like break out 100 times in a row, and Batman and like people have this stupid fucking thing online that they're like, why doesn't Batman kill? Why is Batman so fucking naive that he won't just kill these people like Punisher? Because Joker will just break out. Okay, but like if we're speaking in terms of like what is the ultimately wise and good principle of like, should we kill or not? And is Batman wrong for not killing and instead merely like stopping and imprisoning? I mean, it's not exactly like reasonable to speak in terms of the principle of like, obviously Joker will break out another 100 times and kill these people. I always find that really fucking weird, because like if you just take the story on its own, it's like he does the right thing. And then if you take the story in terms of like the hundreds of stories, it's like, you know, that's nonsense. That's not consistent. That's like raw chaos. You shouldn't fucking draw conclusions from any of that. It doesn't make any sense. So another sort of another fun example of like how the superhero form of storytelling is like structurally incapable of history of dialectical motion, is like the fucking tragic history of like canonical Spider-Man. That I only know this from watching some fucking YouTube about it, and a friend of mine who actually reads comics like losing his mind about it, where Spider-Man, like, actually, you know, essentially in essence originally was like, he's like this teenage hero with incredible power, but with a lot of like naivety, but he, like, you know, it went on for years and years, and he fucking grew up. He grew up, and then eventually he like is like a mature, like almost middle-aged dude, and he like gets married, and they fucking rebooted him. They rebooted him by having him fucking make a deal with the devil in order to rewrite reality itself and undo his marriage ever having happened. And they did this out of a kind of sense of like necessity to the plot structure of like generally writing Spider-Man, where they couldn't write Spider-Man as like a mature married man who has gone through the prior experience of being the naive teenage Spider-Man. They had to like bullshit themselves back into being the teenage naive ethos Spider-Man. This is such a fucking funny example. It's like the worst example ever of it. But there's like actually a lot of things like this. Like, I think the death of Superman is like similar, where like they wrote a story that Superman dies, but they're actually like, no, he like just was sleeping. And it's because like superheroes are like bounded by this weird kind of business driven, but like this weird kind of storytelling structure where they're constructed as if they're within a history. They have to be within a history. They have to like build on prior just like plot elements, and like loyally be capable of being groundwork for future plot elements. But it's like all a merely plot history. While being like in the form of storytelling, like more than almost anything else. I mean, this was true in the comics, and then with the fucking MCU, they like brought that to films, like more true than any kind of other storytelling. There's this structural necessity of sort of conveying a sense of being in history in terms of being within a wider plot than the current narrative, which, you know, in concept is like cool. I like that, but then alongside that, simultaneously, they are the least historically imbued form of storytelling ever, because the characters are wholly defined as a completely static, like kinds of principles, and the kinds of stories that come up are just constantly about the same kinds of themes, and like and then more than any of that, the culture in the background is like, you know, it's just liberal culture. It's like modern America just going on, being itself, with no indication of the world really changing a lot, to be honest. So yeah, all of this is just like within... It's in the background of superhero stories. This stasis. This impossibility of history. It's just like... It's just like a precondition of the superhero narrative. And then, therefore, to think according to the superhero pantheon, you are really like being deceived by the superhero pandemonium, in the sense that you are grounding your sense of ethics, your sense of duty, and your sense of wisdom on this like this array of principles, which each in particular, and then ultimately collectively even more so, they actually are conveying to you this sort of subconscious like projection that that essence is static. That to know someone is to know, like, that they are going to do this over and over. And you know, this is the false wisdom that people don't change. And was, you know, it's very popular, very, very popular. People think that, people find that very insightful. And the superhero ethos conveys this. And then more than that, you have no... that the world doesn't change. You get this sense, thinking according to these principles. The world, you just have this sense that it is the way it is, and that like good, ethical, and wise will is just a matter of just like accepting that this just is the way of the world. Like Gotham just is corrupt. You know, there's not like a deeper, like meta Gotham environmental conditioning process that could be itself conditioned and changed, and therefore Gotham could like not be corrupt. That's just like beyond the possibility of that kind of storytelling, and it's therefore beyond the possibility of the kind of character that is primarily like culturally formed by those kinds of storytelling. I feel like I didn't, with a deep degree of coherence, convey this idea, but also I am now bored of it. So, that will do. I'm not paid for this shit.